Good morning. Good morning, good morning. Waiting for people to pop into the box before we get started this morning. On kind of an overcast day here. We've had some really nice warm weather recently, but I think that's going to change and we'll hopefully get some rain this next week. So, but if you're out there, pop in. Hi. Judy from Israel, welcome, welcome. Pennsylvania and Kathy, Barbara, good morning, good morning. I like the happy pictures of flowers and beach scenes and stuff. Gonna have to find some time to head to San Diego and see my daughter and get my beach fix, my sunny warm beach time. All right, today I want to we're not going to do so much sewing as kind of planning out some things. I'm going to go back to a project that we did before the Mini Moons quilt. And hopefully you're doing good with that. And please, if you have pictures or anything of your mini moons that you've been making, please send those to me. My email address is right there on the screen, or please put them in the forum. Find on Pinterest, Dee Saturday Sampler, and hashtag that if you have those, because we'd love to see what you have done and what yours look like, because I'm sure you guys have gotten some really creative ideas with that, and I would love to see it. But I'm going to go back to something that I did at the beginning of January, and because January is behind us and we're already well into February, I know that it's crazy to keep saying this, but that it's already February 7th, my brother Bill's birthday. So if you're, that it's just coming so quickly. Probably because we're busy, right? But I want to drop down to the table, and we talked about doing, those temperature quilts. And the one thing that about me that I know is that when I, tried to make that when it was first coming out, I thought I'd give it a shot. Doing something every day was tough to try to get that in, even if I was just doing squares. So I had suggested that we do a different kind of temperature quilt, and that was more of how we're doing that week and how we're feeling and all of that. Talked a little bit about that colors mean different things to, in the whole emotional realm or whatever. And so this is my January. It started out for me, the whole contentment, inspiration, and stuff with the purple is kind of where I went with that. So, a relaxed week and all of that. Then the second week came along, and I was looking for, lots of things. There was a lot to do, getting ready for my retreats, and sending out email. It was just a busy, busy time. So for me, that hit brown. It was a little stressful, lots to do. Green, I started, working on mini moons and learning new things. And so for me, that was growth. And then that last week of January was just a lot of fun with grandkids, and it was just a fun, more relaxing than these 2 weeks were. So I just wanted, if you are doing the temperature quilt, or you've thought about it, or anything like that, I would love to see your versions of it with that. So hopefully at the beginning of each month, I won't talk about it probably as much, but I will let you see, what I'm doing with my temperature blocks and quilt. Then the second thing, as I was sitting here, kind of cleaning up last week after the mini moons, I saw all these things that I had cut out of the center, And I thought something ought to be done with that. So I made me a circle, and I started, ironing that and flipping them back. So now I've got my circles, a pile of circles. I'm not sure what I'll do with them just yet. The dot quilt has been very popular for a while. I think we talked about it and did some stuff with that, and now I could add this into it. If you have any great ideas or thoughts on that, please pop them into the chat box, and maybe we can. So I've got, a stack of these left to to turn, so that I can use them in some way. I'll figure out a way that I might use those in a quilt or something. So let me see. Ohio and 20 inches of snow. I am so sorry, Sherry. That sounds just not fun. I thought I'd check and see. All right. So today, I also want to tell you before I forget and move on to something else. If you have not noticed yet, in the quiltshow.com in the shop, they are doing a great sale on fabrics and other things. And it's well worth your time to take a look at that. It's their touchdown 50% fabric yardage, and so it's Super Bowl Sunday sale. So if you're not, so there's select fabrics and stuff to do that, and the code is touchdown 50. So I see Kristen just popped that into the chat box, so take a look at that. So don't forget about that. It's worth going to. I've already gotten some yardage for a backing, so I'm pleased with that myself. So I didn't want to forget that before we moved on. All right, we did the rainbow quilt. And for me, I want to talk a little bit about putting together a Orphan blocks scrap quilt sampler. It's probably more of a sampler with the leftover or the blocks that I had done for the show, because I hadn't really. There's a couple of quilts in there I plan on doing, but I wanted to coordinate fabrics and that type of thing for that. But as I was putting it together, just going through that process, I wanted to talk about that process today. So today is not so much about sewing or learning a new technique in that sense, but I do want to talk about putting that sampler together. So I had all my blocks and was laying them out and thought, what am I going to do with these that I've made, because I like them. I mean, that book was awesome. So then I want to show you. So I took those blocks and I laid them out, and that's the wrong one. Let's go back to I'm showing you all of them. So I kind of started taking my blocks and laying them out and trying to figure out what I was going to really do with them. And let me see if I can get rid of some of what's behind. And, trying to balance things and get an idea of, what I wanted to accomplish with that. So let me see if I can get, that's the same one I had. Let me get rid of that. I am so sorry, guys. I had them in order and I'm not clicking them in order, which is crazy. All right, so I started like this. I went to the floor because my design wall was filled with things, and I started kind of putting things out and saying, okay, where are they going to go? How is this going to look, you know, halfway decent and stuff, because they're not all the same size. And in fact, they aren't even divisible by each other necessarily. And the pinwheel or the circle block there added another element into that, because some blocks were 15, some were 25, some were 15, 13. So they were just, it was kind of complicated, and I was trying to figure out. So I had to add some to strips, trying to make them a little bit bigger, make a couple. There were all kinds of thoughts running through my head, and I would very much like it if you would drop in the chat box and let me, let's, and if you have any ideas or thoughts on how you might put things together. So after much moving things around over and over and over and over again, to get some balance in that, this is kind of what I came up with. And I wanted that circle block to, kind of center everything, because it felt right. And so it was more of a feeling in that than anything else. And so I ended up, I had two of the circus blocks at the top completed. And so I had to put a border on that. And so that border became significant to where everything else was going to go. And so I felt like I had some balance here, and now I needed to kind of do some measuring and working it through to find out how I needed to fill it in. So what became of that then was, let me get this out of the way. And let's go. So this is how it ended up. And at the very top, that became my row, if you will, to determine what I needed to cut and place in that. So that determined the border around those circus blocks, and in between the block on the top right. And then several of those blocks were either 20 or 25 by 5-inch blocks, and so that kind of fit in there. So I working through and keeping the background. Now I started with the thought of having a solid background around all the blocks, but when I started doing that, for me it just didn't work. So I went back to the idea that was more or less in the book, and I used a variety of the neutrals, and that seemed to hold it together a little bit better. And I don't know, it just, for me, it just kind of made the quilt pop. And so if you have any thoughts on how you put that together, I'd like to hear it, because the math was not easy in terms of taking, orphan blocks or lots of variety, and especially if they're not the same size or not divisible by each other. I was hoping they would all be divisible by, say, 12 or 20 or whatever, but they really weren't. Like that ring one in there, I think that one ended up being 25 inches. The owl was 20 inches. And it was totally... thank you, Diane. I'm looking at your comments, because I would really like to hear from you of how you tackle this. For me, it's just complicated. It's complicated and it's fussy, and I don't always do great with fussy and complicated with like this, trying to make sure that everything fits. Okay. I'm just looking at comments and stuff. I think we're back at the Super Bowl sale. But if you have, I would really, truly like to hear from you. So if you can pop into the chat box and say hello, I would really appreciate that. Good morning, Phyllis. Gosh, it's good to see your name there. And but I think the key here in terms of putting a sampler together like this is finding your balance and what makes you feel good and happy about how you laid out the quilt and how it is looking. And then from there, finding, for me, it was that top row. Once I had it kind of in place, I based everything off of that. I, put the order in there. The middle row for me, where the big circle is, and I'm calling it a middle row, but it's the section, so that I could sew it together in sections. I could fit that with the arrow, the circle, the 4 pinwheels on the left, and it fit closely to that top row. So then it was adding the amount of fabric that I needed on the border so that I could put the circles onto those circus blocks and get the far right one fit in there. And then everything else was laid out so that it fit within that amount. I put tape down on the carpet and leveled it out so that I would make sure that I was getting the math correct. If you've been here on the show with me at all at any time, you know that math is not my, strong suit. And so, but with the pinwheel block over there, each of those was 5 inches. So I had a 20-inch block there, and I put it up against that 25-inch block, and that, what for me, was easy, because then I just simply put a strip of fabric, a 5-inch strip of fabric above that, so that was completed. Then I, had to tackle that arrow and, little star block. And so there was, a lot of white space. And again, looking at it and having it feel okay, one solid piece of fabric there was not going to cut it. It just, I tried and tried. And, my husband gives his opinion from time to time, and I asked for it a lot as well. And he, said, if you use different colors of fabric, I think it would look better. And that kind of just opened it up to that whole thing. Then below that row, I needed to give some length so that I could get those pinwheel stars in there. So I simply put a row of a variety of neutrals. And so that was easy to do because I could just take it straight across because it was measuring like 60 inches, I think, at that point across, and I can work with that. And then just fitting in the bottom part. I think the most difficult one for me, and there's a part of me that says I probably should have remade and done a different owl. He was tough to find a way to put in there. And it was more the fabrics that I chose and not the pattern. And I appreciate your comments where, that you like what happened. But if you have any ideas of when you've had to put together a sampler like this, and I would appreciate that, if you can answer some of those questions for all of us, because this is where it gets difficult, and why I have orphan blocks sitting in a cupboard in a pile and not in a quilt. And I want to get them out, and now that I've tackled this one and got it up, and now I need to get it quilted and think about border, even if I wanted a border on there, and I'm not sure. if I truly want a border other than the binding on this quilt. I don't think I do, because there's plenty going on as it is. So, when you tackle, samplers and orphan blocks and stuff, we have those things, in our stashes, and I know friends of mine who have them there too, and they haven't done anything with. A lovely lady that where I lived in Anaheim popped in this morning. It was so fun to see Phyllis. But she was one that could put things together in such an amazing way. And I was always intrigued and fascinated by how she got things to come together and made those incredibly beautiful quilts. And so if you have thoughts and ideas, please, please, please pop in and let us know what those are. And so, in fact, I think when I started doing this back in the pandemic, when we went to Zoom teaching and stuff, I think my first project was Long Time Gone, which was the Jen Kingwell quilt. And that too, we had different, quilt styles, but they were all different sizes and stuff. But somebody else had already figured it out, and all we had to do was follow the pattern, which was kind of nice, because I appreciated that very much in terms of that, and that kind of got me going on that type of thing. So I did want to talk about putting together a sampler quilt and what we can do with all this stuff that we don't want to throw away. For example, these little circles that I look at them and I think, well, that's a lot of fabric, and that's a big thing that I cut out of the center of that. Now I feel like I have to do something with it. But that again, I could put something like that within another, sampler quilt, or getting those orphan blocks out and doing that. All right, next week I want to pop in and talk a little bit about that. Before our next big, you might face this quilt instead of using a binding. Thank you, Melanie. That did not occur to me. And I have thought of the mini moons blocks. I actually have thought about doing that. I'm going to have to sew one to see how those little inside circles, how easily that is to sew. But yes, that was definitely a thought in there. Or those dot quilts that I've seen all over Pinterest and all over different quilting sites as another possibility in terms of that. But next week, I got carried away. Next week, we're going to talk about equilateral triangles and give you some thoughts and ideas on a quilt you could put together for that. There are so many of those out there. So I'm looking forward to working with that, and I've had fun playing with the triangles. And so that's what we're going to be doing next week. Sherry, you want to try facing a quilt? That is great, because I did that, I don't know when, but it's in the list of classes, and where I did how to face a quilt, and if you don't know how to do that. So I look forward to seeing you next week. Do not forget about the sale on Super Bowl Sunday, which is tomorrow, and have an absolute great week, everyone, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.